Okay, so I'm gonna try and do a overview, rundown, explanation, whatever you want to call it, of my setup as requested by Devlin on Discord and Specu. I hope I'm pronouncing that right on TikTok. Maybe this is more just to explain this to myself more than anything. I think I have everything in place for the studio this weekend, so this might be my only chance at explaining this while there's some semblance of consistency. If you're like me, you probably switch everything up in your modular a lot. I know I can't resist swapping every freaking thing out every minute, but I think finally now things are actually where I want them to be. And let's just go into it. So what I have is two IntelliGel 104 7U cases that I bought directly from the factory in Burnaby. They are the blemish ones, and they are joined together by the joiner plates. I use little rubber stands to make the angle a little more steep on the bottom. That's pretty dull, but hey, now you know. I think what is the most important, or where I kind of build around, is like the audio routing. So I know it's modular and completely interchangeable, but I sort of like think of this thing as a book, like everything is going left to right, or the signal flow should be going left to right. And I ended up getting hung up, at least building a whole bunch, on doing submixing. Like originally I had a mixer for the top case and a mixer for the bottom case, and then those were running out into the desktop version of the blue box. I'll get to that in a second. But I just think having three mixers was way too complicated, and so I'm hoping to straighten that up here. Although in saying that, it's kind of like I ended up with a bunch of submixes and crazy routing, but I'll explain that. And then I think we'll just make a patch to demonstrate what this is and how I usually work. So I think, yeah, I'll start with the audio routing. So what I like to do is keep everything in one row where possible. So let's just go top to bottom. We'll do full synth voices. I'm not going to go through module by module, but you can see them here. These are all full synth voices. And then towards the right, we have the oscillators. There's an analog pony VCO here. Triptych filter distortion unit. Low pass gate. 3 VCA and Zadar to control it. Desmodus Versio at the end of the chain. And the idea is basically that we can take three voices, put them in the VCA if we like, and then I'll run all of this through Desmodus, and then we'll do a submix. Now, these two units that I have here, the stereo strips, worth their weight in gold. This makes it really easy to, basically, I sum everything down to one voice for the synth voices and one voice for the drum voices. Now I'll just talk about the drum voices while we're going left to right, so I don't get ahead of myself. Drums are my favorite part of Eurorack. I think I put a lot of focus on them, and for that reason they get their own mixer. I did have the Cosmix Pro before and changed it out because I find the mutable switches here are really useful, and it has a color section, which I usually keep all the way down, but just having it not bypassed makes it gives us this crunchiness, like a nice subtle crunchiness. Just, I don't know if it's causing compression by the stereo strip or what the reason is, but I think it's awesome. And because basically most of my music is just deconstructing a 4-bar loop, I find using the switch mutes really important. So all of my drum voices get summed into the Cosmix, and then I run it through the 100 grit, which is just a I don't want to say classic, but if you're into Eurorack, you're probably familiar with it. It's a distortion, a filter. It sounds awesome. It's really gnarly, and I love performative tools, so having those brass balls to touch for the videos are great. And then, yeah, it gets its own stereo strip. And the other thing I really like about these stereo strips is just having everything summed down to 2 volume controls makes mixing it on the fly really easy. If I want to fade in the drums, you can just do that. And the EQ section is really nice right now. I try and bring them back to 0 whenever I'm done, but basically what I'll usually do is just take the drum voice and cut the mid hair, boost some bass and some treble, but then depending on what the synth patch is, we'll just like bring some treble and mids in to kind of, I don't know if the term is like spreading the mix out, but give the drums some room in the low end and the synths some room in the high end. Now, all of that, I'm going to get to the sequencers in a second, but all of that comes into the Blue Box by 1010 Music. I had the desktop version for 3 years or something. I don't use it in a particularly complicated way. I know it can do a lot of like linear tracking. I don't use it for much of that. I just bring the outputs of the 2 stereo strips in, and then I do a send of this all into a final quote-unquote effects section, which I'm not going to name every module individually because it'll take all day, but I will for this section because I think this stuff is important. We have a data bender. Gotta love it. This is technically a Timp Legio, but I have the firmware flash to Rucha Legio. Yeah, so basically high quality masking tape to label everything off of that firmware, and then Qubit Aurora, which is an awesome destructive reverb, and then one of the first modules, and one of the only modules I bought new, which was the Modbat Performer, which I'm totally obsessed with, and it's super performative and super usable. And honestly, the reverb itself, if you hit shift and leave the reverb on, it's also a great reverb on its own. And then, yeah, so just to finish that up, that all roots back into the Blue Box, and I, in my videos, record up and sync after just the return of that. I don't EQ or record or track any of the individual tracks. We just have 2 coming out of the stereo strip and then recording their return through the effects loop. Now in the sequencers, or the one last thing, I have the 1010 Music Bitbox sampler. I really neglect this thing and I really should use it more often, but it's really hard, I guess. Not hard, but I really neglect it because often I'm just like, okay, I'm going to use this for drums. And then it's so much easier to just pick at the synth modules, honestly. But I will get to this eventually. And I do plan, and the reason it's in the lowercase is because I want to sort of trigger some samples from it. Maybe some, like, I don't know, cheesy, like if you've heard hip hop songs where they just like trigger samples from film, TV, whatever. I want to get into doing that with this guy, is why it's in this one. Master clock provided by Pam's New Workout. It's basically, I did try and get all my patch cables of the stuff that is patched every time to be right angle, and then it's easy to just, every time I'm making a new patch, you can tell not to remove those right angle ones, but I have 2 little jumpers here. And what we have is clock coming out of the first output, and then a reset coming out of the 5th, which I buffer in the mult here. And then we're sending this to WMD Metron, the drum sequencer. This thing is awesome. I've had many sequencers so far, but this is the first drum one, and honestly, it's great. If you have a background in electron boxes like I do, this will be pretty familiar to you, I think. And it is receiving clock and reset from that. And we're sort of daisy chaining it too, and I'll come back to these guys in a second. The ASQ1 by ALM. Now, this can do, and does do, pitch, it can do those triggers, but I don't think they're quantized, at least not that I know of. And so basically you press, I don't have two hands to do this to demonstrate, but you press a trigger, and then using the Volterra, you can set its pitch, but you get a number value on the screen out of 1,000 or whatever it is. It's not like, you don't get like a C3 or a note out of it. So what I like to do with that is run that into the quantizer of the ASQ, so I can deliberately set its pitch. And then on top of that, you can also do two sequencers that are built into that. So I think they play really well together, and I really did struggle with trying to find a sequencer that I liked. And I found this pair, this trio, I guess, if you include the Volterra, is really useful. And then I also have the ARP here because it's it's really easy to just do arpeggios if I want to do an arpeggio on the key of C, I can just run ASQ1 into the ARP and then send it a whole bunch of triggers in the key of C, and it'll write a melody for you. So that is just about the setup. And then I will go through. I didn't talk about the tetrapad because I sort of feel like it's its own separate thing. It can be an LFO. It can be a finger drumming surface. It can be a sequencer in itself. So it's kind of its own thing, and it hasn't made it into any patches yet, but it will. Yeah, so let's make a patch together. Oh, and before I forget, you can't forget about grommet. It's grommet. Okay, so maybe I can also talk about my process for syncing everything up. I don't usually use this Tascam, but I am just for today because I'm talking to you. But what I always do in my videos is either show with my finger the blue box starting. I don't have any way to route the blue box to my phone or anything, so everything I do is on mobile and iMovie. Afterwards, I just have to either show with my hands or show with the screen, just the clock turns from white to red, and sync it up after. So if you've ever seen any of the videos, if I'm starting right away and you're just like pointing, that's why. Yeah, so I think I'm going to try and make a patch here with one hand. So maybe I can put this Tascam in a way that it'll hold itself up. It's too thick to fit in there. Well, let's hope that works. Okay, so I have my cable holder on the right side here, and I tried to do color coding of everything, and the idea was that pink stuff is for audio, black stuff is for reset, white stuff is for clock, but in reality it doesn't always work. And every thread I read about people talking about color coding their patches, they always said, oh yeah, I remember when I was new and I tried that. So at least I'm not alone in hoping to do it, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people do it. Okay, so how I usually do things is, starting with the Metron, I'm going to patch out a trigger. Sorry, I just need to unplug the tetrapad. Patching out trigger from Metron into the Ultra Kick, which I am using in basically every patch. It is an outstanding kick drum. And I'm just going to lay 4 on the floor, and we're going to start that with PAMs. That sounds crazy. That is because the effects, that happens a lot. So, yeah, a lot of times when I end my patch, it stops, or the last thing is just kind of exploding with the data bender and the Aurora and going crazy with the glitchy stuff. So when you come back to it and they haven't reset it, it sounds pretty bonkers. Just gonna tune my Ultra Kick, or try and get a nice kick sound out of it. So I'm going to EQ the stereo strip like I mentioned. So this is at noon. I just want to bring up a little low end and a little treble just to give a nice scooped sound. And then this sounds a little high to me, so I'm going to try and bring the pitch down a bit. I like that a lot more. And then we'll bring in a snare, and I like to have options in here as all of these drum modules, but I think for this video we're going to try and go as simple as possible. So it's a preset on the Plonk for hip hop snare, which I think is supposed to be like an 808, but it sounds like this. I'll throw in some triggers. We're going to make this stupid simple. That wasn't even 4 on the floor. Well, it sounds a little goofy, but that's okay. We just want to show how it's done here, or how I do it. Okay, now I am, for the sake of simplicity, going to not use the Metalloid percussion entity from SSF, which I usually do, and I'm just going to go into the Mosaic hi-hat 1U module. I quite like it. It's really simple and straightforward, and it's just basically a noise source, and it sounds good. And I always do a very scientific way of programming my hats, which is, that'll do. I'll make some hat sounds. So yeah, I'm going to keep it to 1 bar for this video, but yeah, usually I would try and get a little crazier. But for today, I think that is a straightforward drum patch. Now, 100 grit is running for this whole time. I like to do a little bit of high pass, a little more resonance to kind of make it squawk a little bit. Maybe not that much. Just kind of bring in some nastiness so that we have something to do performative-wise when we touch the brass connections. And I think sounds good to me. One thing that I'll mention now is, so everything's routed through this effects chain. I forgot to mention the Happy Nerding FX8 is the last thing, and the only patch I have on here is the DJ filter, which I really like. I think this is like my favorite DJ filter, and I had 3 of them before, and none of them were as good as this one, or I didn't like them as much. I shouldn't say they weren't as good, but this was easily my favorite. Problems with other DJ filters were either requires a center notch, or doesn't have a center notch, or it doesn't have a bypass switch. Now effects say it doesn't have a center notch, but it's so easy to use the dry wet knob to bypass it, so I can basically just do high pass filter and then we'll bring it in instead of sweeping the filter itself. Get a nice DJ high pass thing. And I love doing drops like this because it's so, well, it's cheating really, turning my 4-bar loop into a song by taking things away rather than making something new. Yeah, something like that. Oh, sorry, forgot to mention that, so I figured I'd mention it now. And now, while that's good to go, I will bring in some synth sounds. And what we're going to do is trigger the Volterra. And I'm just going to do 4 on the floor. Well, not 4 on the floor for melodies, but just do simple quarter notes for ease of use. And we're taking the Volterra out because I did all of my sequencing on the first output into the quantizer of the ASQ1. Now I'm going to switch ASQ1 to quantizer mode, and it has a scale in there right now, but I'm going to enter my own. just do C minor because it's really straightforward. And then I will patch the input of this to somewhere. Where should it be? What's a really straightforward voice I like to use on everything is the Surface by Qubit. It is, sorry, Grommet. So easy to get a bunch of unique sounds out of it. So it's perfect for this video, so I'm going to patch out of the Surface. I'm going to skip Desmodus for this video, and we'll go straight into the stereo strip. Now I'm not triggering it, so we won't hear any sound. To get some triggers, I will grab another patch cable. And what I need to do is not out of the ASQ1, but out of the 4th track of the Volterra, take some gates and apply to this trig. And then bring my drums down just so we can hear what's going on with the Surface. So Surface, we're gonna go through the models. Yeah, and it's physical modeling, but I don't... all the comparisons between Rings and Surface, I don't know. There's some of it there, but almost like acid baseline model in here I love. Okay, so I'm just gonna change the pitch of these to be a little higher because it's not really making a melody currently. So I like that. It's goofy, but it's simple enough for this one. I'll bring it down a hair. Some more decay in. I'll bring that down, bring the drums back in. So yeah, this is a really simplified version of what I'm doing to make my jams, and I think this is really cheesy, but this is how I would do my recording. So we're already recording, we don't need to sync it up, but I would come to the blue box, sync it up using my either finger motion because we can't really see the screen, or just point it at the thing, hit record, and then usually come in with some performance effects. Let's start with the DJ filter and start with no sound out of the left stereo strip. And we'll trigger this with Pam's new workout. Just doing some filter sweeps on both sides. Bring in some synth. See why I love these performance effects, are just cheating. Simplest 4-bar loop that I'm trying to pretend is an actual song. Bring in some glitchiness because I have glitchiness. Just data bender. Data bender's great. Performer reverb. High pass. Could have timed that better, but that's okay. You get the idea. Now Aurora, crazy reversed pitched up sample, just bringing it in for total destruction. Sounds very foreboding, I guess. I love that. Yeah, I have the delay patch, which is the arcade button on the top left, set to almost like super short, so it almost sounds like resonator-y. And we'll bring in Rucciollegio, which is another filter. High pass. Wave folding. I love this thing. Bring it up. Roll up the Aurora. Fixate. Drop it. Yeah. Anyway, that's how I make my patch.